phones physically with a non-digital version of the text. Did Noah and Cassie go out to meet their friend?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that a proposal happened.
Possibly.
They said that they thought one of their friends may have proposed this morning, so they might step out to talk to them.
Try and convince them against it.
Is that what it is? That maybe. I'm not certain. I would. Yes. Anyhow, so so this week we're in Noah. So we're in 6:9 through 11:32, and so it's the Noah story. It also includes the Table of Nations, and it also includes the Tower of Babel or Babel, however you want to say it. I think either way is acceptable. So if you say Babel and I respond with Babel, I'm not correcting your pronunciation. All right. So the first thing I want to do is, when we're looking at the Noah story with the flood narrative, is this is one of the things we did on Monday night, and I think it might be kind of cool to do it here, is I want to list some of our preconceived notions about what the flood narrative is about, and just begin there to see, and maybe even do it as well with the Babel story. We'll see. But so what are some of the things that when you think about the flood narrative, you think it is about, or elements of the story, and you may be right and you may be wrong. And so, but what are some of those preconceived notions about the flood narrative?
Animals.
Just animals?
Specifically 2 by 2 of every kind.
Okay, so 2 by 2. All right. What else?
There's 7 of the bird.
Okay. All right, what else?
That everyone died except for Noah's dead.
Like a moral cleansing act. Or baptism, perhaps.
Rainbows.
Anything about rainbows or just rainbows?
One second.
They're a promise.
Yeah, they're like a promise, like a covenant that whole earth won't flood again. Maybe just Long Island and most of Florida.
Okay. Anything else?
I never understood the rainbows because they don't happen until it stops, so you don't know when it's raining if it's ever going to stop.
Okay.
The whole
Part of
world.
it, or connected to death to all as a worldwide.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question for the people online?
Yeah. What are some of our preconceived notions about the flood narrative? Like, what are some of the things that we think are that the Noah's flood story is about? So let me know if someone has some.
Yeah. Mine is it covered the whole world.
Yep.
Water.
He just said it right as you asked me that question. So good.
I don't know where this comes from, but I've heard some people theorize that it never actually rained on the earth until this event, that
Okay.
all water came from underground.
Yep.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
A cleansing.
Okay.
Probably more cleansing.
So whoever said that was on the board, but yes, excellent. So cleansing, I just underlined it. I know it's hard to see the board from the camera, so I apologize.
A very large boat.
Oh, yeah.
I'm on a boat.
I like hanging out. There's only one unicorn.
Yes.
Only one No.
Actually, the unicorns are forgotten. That's how it was done.
Okay, so certain mythical animals, or do you want me to put that?
I mean, me and my
So
friends kind of made
dinosaurs.
that up. Yeah. So about the unicorns.
Thanks, Ken Ham.
Everyone ridiculed Noah.
Okay.
there was no other good people except for
Oh, yeah.
Oh, this is part of what I heard, and that is that like, it's talked about like the floodgates opening up, and that's what caused like plates to shift and.
So what was it before? What was it called though?
Oh, like that one.
Pangea.
Was it Pangea?
Yeah.
All right. So we're just gonna put Pangea as a shortcut for that. Anything else?
I always wanted to know what the firmament was.
Okay.
I had heard somewhere like people thought there was like water actually surrounding the planet, and
Okay.
it caused some of the rains.
Called what?
Caused some of the rains.
Oh,
That's where
caused
some of the
some
rainwater
rains.
came from.
Okay. Any other things? And we don't have, this doesn't have to be, but I want to make sure.
Well, and then, again, it's kind of corollary. This was the humanity after this came, what do you want to call it? This is the, all humans now are descended from this family, would be another one of those.
So Noah's the second Adam.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna put Noah / Adam. Hopefully you guys all remember what that means.
Human.
Anything
So
else?
it's, yeah, the new humanity or renewed something comes out of this, literally, figuratively.
Anybody else online have anything? All right. So one of the things that I like to do when we're looking at a text is to just try and figure out what some of our lenses are that we're reading the text through. So that way we can kind of recognize that, so when we actually read the text, we can see where or where not that stuff is in the text. So let's read the flood narrative together real quick. So it's going to be Genesis 6, starting with verse 9. And I think decide how far this. I'm just going to read, let's see, from 9 through the end of 7. And then hopefully you guys had a chance during the week to read the other section of this. So these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark. I'm going to skip through this section. 16. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its sides. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kinds. 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Then the Lord said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. And rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him. The Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land, in whose nostrils was the breath of life, died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals, creeping things, and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. I think that ending right there is also something that a lot of people, people think that 40 days and 40 nights is how long they were actually apart. Like the flood lasted 40 days and 40 nights. That was just the amount of time it rained. It was 40 days and 40 nights. The flood lasted much longer. So a couple things here. One, we have in this section something that I think needs to be talked about a ton within our theology, and that is God regretted ever making man. Like God almost in this, and not almost, the language there is repenting. So was it good?
Yes,
Awesome.
very good,
All right.
lots of tears.
Hey, listen, Mark is sick.
All right, this one.
Yeah, you might want to put your hood up. Actually, if you could go outside now, Mark, that would be good. But in this picture, we have that the world had become so corrupt that God repents in having created man. What do you think about that? What do you think about, I think we actually feel uncomfortable with the word regretted, but I think we feel more uncomfortable with what that Hebrew word implies, which is repented. What do you think about the idea that God begins to repent or regret that he ever created man? Is that, you guys are just all okay with that? That doesn't...
I think that either they must have been a hell of a lot worse than we are now, which I find hard to believe, or that or that his repentance was localized and it wasn't everybody on the entire earth.
Okay.
From Kelly, it definitely flies in the face of God being never changing.
Yeah. Well, at least, so here's what I would say about that, because I think that's where a lot of people begin to become uncomfortable, because all of a sudden God changes his mind about something, and we've been taught that God is unchanging. what I would argue that has been historical from ancient sages to early Christendom isn't so much, in modern Christendom, isn't so much that God isn't reciprocal in relationship and interactive and therefore changes in those ways, but rather God's character is unchanging. So or God's character itself, so the essence of God is unchanging. And I would say one of those essences is relationality, that God is touched by emotion. God is emotional. God responds to mankind. So it definitely flies in the way of some of the ways that we've heard of God being unchanging. But I would say the one that seems to be consistent in the scriptures is that God's character is unchanging. If you always know that God is about justice, you always know that God is about mercy, you always know that God is about grace, you always know that God is about love, and those things are unchanging. But God seems to be influenced by humanity, right? I mean, like one of my favorite scenes in the text is where God tells Jeremiah, "Do not pray for Israel, because I do not want to forgive them." Right? Like that's a dumb paraphrase, but that's the essence in this section of Jeremiah where God's like, "Please, Jeremiah, I know what you're going to do, and you're going to come and you're going to stand before me on behalf of the people, and you're going to tell me to take it easy. I know that because Moses did that, Abraham did that, all these people did this. I know that that's what you're going to do. Do not do it. I want to be angry. I want to punish them." Right? And so God is demonstrating, at least in that section of Jeremiah, as Jeremiah imagines it, that God can be compelled to change what God is going to do. So, anybody have any, like, does that like really bother anyone that God repents?
I'm comfortable with God repenting, more so, in fact. However, like the expression of that repentance being violence, at least in this story or this narrative, as it's being communicated, that's where more of my problem exists.
Okay.
And it makes him feel a little more relatable in one sense, but what Chris said, definitely, that's kind of intimidating. It's like both, it's like the human-like aspect, which I don't know too much about. It seems like if he feels then similar things to us, or if he can have his mind changed.
Yeah. The verse that says that God destroys, that he's going to destroy all life, the Hebrew word is the exact same Hebrew word as the Hebrew word used when it's talking about that the world has become corrupt. And so a lot of the rabbis had imagined that God just says, "I will let you to your own." That God is just allowing it to happen at this point. That so like the world had become corrupt, and you're like, and God was just like, "Okay, well, I'm going to let the corruption destroy the earth." And so that's kind of the picture. And I think this is because I think along with you and a huge tradition, a great cloud of witnesses, struggle with the idea that God would respond by destroying. And so they're trying to find a way to understand this section without it being God's violence towards destroying people, especially since in our mind, we can't imagine that the whole world was worthy of being eliminated. Like we can't. I shouldn't say we can't. I think, though, collectively, one of the arguments I've heard consistently is that there had to be someone else that was good, right? So what is a flaw with Noah? Like, why isn't Noah known today like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David? Like, they're all celebrated as these great people of faith and these great moments in Scripture. And Noah is relegated to the flanogram, right, in Sunday school.
He never pleaded for the people. It was like,
Right. So that's the big thing. Everyone else seems to go before God. I talk about Jeremiah. Talk about Abraham, right? Abraham, the very first act Abraham does when he's in community with God, right, in covenant with God, the first prayer Abraham has is preserve Sodom and Gomorrah, which in the imagination of the sages and such, was worse or just as bad as the earth was in the time of Noah, yet here is Abraham standing before God, pleading for God not to destroy it. Right? You have Moses when God is so teed off at Israel that he's like, I'm going to wipe them all out, and I'm going to make an even bigger and better nation out of you. And Moses is like, what does Moses say?
Me as well.
Blot me out as well. Take me out as well. Right? And so all of these pictures we have of these people of faith, instead, and this is where I have found that I have felt kicked in the teeth as a Christian, is one of my favorite Jewish thinkers says in his commentary on this section that Noah behaves like a Christian and is only worried about his own personal salvation. Oh, man, that is brutal. That Noah's only concerned about saving his own ass. He's not concerned about anyone else, and he's like, well, as long as I'm safe, we're good. And that, what do you guys think about that? That the great people of Jewish memory are people that fight for the salvation of everyone around them. And yet the one person that, at least this Jewish scholar, connects with Christianity, just is concerned about that. Screw everyone else, as long as I'm safe. I get on the boat, I'm good. Right? How do you guys feel about hearing that? For me, that was rough.
Well, that makes me feel a little better, actually. Because if God thought that Noah was the most faithful of all the people, but knew in Noah's heart that Noah was not concerned about other people, and yet still picked him to save,
Yes.
then maybe I need to be concerned about other people.
Then maybe you don't, you said.
Right.
I think God will still save you. Yeah.
Another, this goes, as someone was saying earlier, one of the things with God repenting or regretting brings into question, what is God's knowledge of the future? What does that even mean? And for those, if you're all familiar with open view of God, God knows everything that's knowable, and since the future hasn't happened,
Right.
it's not knowable, so that's like sort of the way around God's sovereignty. So, with that in mind, or that possibility of God not knowing perfectly what doesn't yet exist, what if he was shocked, like, you're not inviting anyone? Right? It's just animals? Whoa.
Yeah.
You know, so that could be another, and that doesn't come through there. I don't know.
No, I think that's fair. In fact, many people have argued that Abraham, who it said was given 10 tests, and the 10th test was the binding of Isaac. There is a thread of Jewish thought that says that Abraham actually failed that 10th test because he didn't plead for Isaac's life like he did for Sodom and Gomorrah's. And so it's
like compliance.
Right, and God was expecting Abraham to plead for Isaac in the same way that he pleaded for Sodom and Gomorrah. And so because he didn't, that he failed this 10th test. And one of the things they point to in the text to kind of back that view is that we never see God interact with Abraham again after that. Abraham doesn't even return to Sarah, because when Sarah dies, Abraham has to travel to where she is. And so there's a total breaking of the relationship. And that's a small vein of Jewish thought, but I think it's a fascinating one. But I think it goes into the same kind of realm where if you think about this, so the argument is that it took, I think, I might be transposing the numbers. It's either 120 years or 210 years to build the ark, according to tradition. And I don't know if we can figure that out based on numbers in the text or not. But if you think about it, I think it's 210 is the number, and I won't forget that there's a question there. But that the United States is barely older than 200 years old. Barely older than 210 years. And so Noah is building this ark for all that time before the floodwaters are sent. That there's like all this time given and space given that that I think we just, because we're, it's the whole, we're reading a huge clump of time so quickly in just a handful of verses that we miss the amount of time that it took to build this ark. And I wonder if God imagined that Noah would be like telling people, you should get on. You should build an ark too. Like hand out plans for the ark to other people.
Everybody's building an ark.
Yeah, that's right. Come on. I know you don't know what a boat is, and I know you don't know what rain is, but it's gonna happen. I'm not a crazy man. All right, what was it?
That's a good segue into Rami's question. Can Noah's extended building of the ark be seen as a prayer or hope that the generation will repent?
Yeah.
And he added, seems like a long time to build a boat, even a boat as big as that.
Yeah, I mean, Ken Ham is getting it done in like a third of the time. And so if we're using that as any kind of a reference, where is that, by the way? Somewhere. It's in Ohio, isn't it? No, the ark that's being built. I think it's in Dayton.
Probably.
Sounds like Dayton.
Yeah, except yeah, I think, Romy, I think you're spot on. I think that it leaves, we constantly miss these moments in the text of these huge gaps of time that can be seen as mercy, that I think because we read so quickly, we don't notice them. For instance, even in the conversation with God making covenant with Abraham, he says there will come a time when your people will be captives in a nation not their own for 400 years because the sins of the people in Canaan haven't gotten to such a great height that I can kick them out. So God's going to give the Canaanites 400 years before he evicts them. Right? And again, I know in that picture we struggle with the imagery of violence and everything goes along with that, but we miss, I would argue, the statement in there because it's just a passing statement because the sins of Canaan are not great enough yet. And so God is giving time for them to repent, you would hope, kind of like he did Nineveh, right? In the Jonah story, we have all these stories throughout the text where God gives plenty of time for people to repent and turn. What do you guys think is the point of the creation narrative being undone in this section? So God regrets ever making man, and then the waters come back that God had separated in Genesis in the creation narrative, right? The waters from the heavens start to fall and come back down. The vault that was created, that is now destroyed, and the language there is one of destruction of an object, and so the vault that was created is destroyed, and now the waters are coming back together, the land is disappearing, tohu vavohu. And I would argue the formless and void is how we see the corruption on the earth. That kind of fits in that same language of formless and void, and so all of the earth is behaving like tohu vavohu, right? And so in some way God is saying, okay, well, tohu vavohu only existed prior to the creative process, and so I will let everything go back to the way it was. And so the breath of life leaves, the land closes up, the animals die, right? And so God reboots the earth in some way. He takes it back to the creation era. What do you guys think? Why do you think that in the author's imagination, the author wanted to show the reversal of the creation narrative?
From Romy, Rubik's cubes are so complex that often in order to fix them, you have to take a few steps back, really all the way back. I wonder to some extent if it was inevitable.
Okay, so like God had to go back a handful of steps in order to correct. Okay.
And I was going to say, a lot of people like to create stuff, invent stuff, and then refine it. Take something away, put a new part in place, and tweak it, and customize it, and try to make it better.
Okay.
God has characters similar to that, or nature. Oh, and earlier I wanted to say, I guess wiping off everyone on the planet except Noah and his family, pruning that, how is that related to pruning the vine? That context story?
Yeah. I don't know. I struggle because, to cut all the roses down but one on a bush is a step beyond pruning. It feels, I don't know that I would disagree with the idea that there's a pruning imagery there, but it seems excessive. The rabbis argued that the only reason that Noah was told to put a window in the ark was so anytime he wanted to complain about his situation, he could look out the window and see what everyone else was doing. Which I think is another intriguing piece to this as we try to figure out, I think part of the difficulty, so let me take a couple steps back, like Roman's talking. I think when it comes to the flood narrative, the part that makes it the most difficult or more accessible is whether or not you hold this as a historical event. See, if you hold this as a historical event, then you're left with the character of God and violence, and you're left with anger, and you're left with a God who is willing to wipe everyone out at a moment's notice. Not at a moment. See, we don't know how long this corruption was and what the corruption looked like. If we view it as creative imagination, prophetic imagination, as Walter Brueggemann often refers to these types of things, is that they're trying to communicate something about God and creation, and they do it in a story or imagery that makes it relatable, understandable, so we can learn something. That creates two very different feelings. So maybe let's take a moment and think about that. So does anybody want to share? How does it change, in your opinion, if it's factual, historical, or if it's metaphorical imagery, storytelling to explain something?
It's factual, and the violence or the killing of everyone is very hard.
Okay. Okay.
Because metaphorical, it seems to gel more with other religions and other traditions that have flood stories in them. I think that learning that, in my adulthood, that there are many different flood stories helped me put the biblical flood story into perspective. Because if you view it as a literal story, it's too easy to get bogged down in the details of how long was the boat and how many animals were there, did really everybody die or not. And I have the same kind of discussions with my kids about the Garden of Eden. Like, if you're going to really get bogged down with was it an apple or a pear, you're missing the.
Yeah.
I believe this one's from Michael. Perhaps it suggests that creation wasn't necessary, that God didn't need to create everything.
Perhaps it was.
It suggests that creation wasn't necessary, that God didn't need to create everything.
As in God's fine without there being creation, or?
Yeah, Michael,
Sounds like a
are you able to turn on the mic and let him talk?
Yeah, can you speak? I don't think you're on mute. I don't think anyone is. Oh, no mic.
Oh, okay. Ask him if he can, I'm not 100% sure I understand what he's saying, and would love to hear more on that. If he's able to type that well enough. So here's something interesting to me. So while he's thinking about, did you write?
No, Romy had something though. If you want.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
We view God as a being to be emulated. A literal Genesis account almost sets up binary between God of the flood who destroyed the world versus a Jesus who died rather than destroy everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any yet. And I think that's what a lot of people have done. Yes?
It gets I get kind of confused because then it's like, what's a story and what's real that goes down that road. But
Sure.
I don't know too much about the Old Testament yet. But it's like, that never happened. The whole thing just kind of a metaphor. And does that make sense?
Right. So here's something to kind of hopefully help you think about that. Have you ever told like your parents a story that you remember from when you were little and you're like, that is not how it happened at all? Like you are totally remembering that inaccurately. Has that ever happened?
I have never encountered that, but it might have happened before. I mean, not that I recall, but I can understand
Okay,
that.
so it doesn't make your story less true because it's how you've remembered it. And so it's a part of your memory of life and everything. It might be factually inaccurate, but it's true of your memory of it. Does that make sense? So when we think about things like a flood narrative or the garden or something like that, it might be factually inaccurate, but there's truth in the story. So I would argue that the garden narrative has a ton of truth, right? However, it's not meant to be factually accurate, is my opinion. If someone held differently than that, I'm okay with that. But for me, I don't need it to be factually accurate. It's the same way as you grew up and you were taught fables. And the fables are true, but rarely did an animal, actually a chicken or a rooster, play a guitar and walk around like Aesop's fables, right? That we don't normally have that, but we would say the fable is true, the story is true, the moral of the story is true. Is that helpful? So I don't think we need to think about like, well, if we throw out this being factual and we throw out everything else being factual, I think the argument more so is there truth in the way that they're telling the story? And I would argue yes. Whether or not there was a physical ark, is it important? Because one, you don't really know that to be the case. Regardless, we don't have any photos of this ark. Though some people, I guess, have claimed to have taken photos of the ark. But we don't have any photos of said ark, yet we believe there to be truth about the story, even without evidence. So for me, it's not, it doesn't become complicated. As I've said, I think I said last week, if at the pearly gates, if those are real, that Adam walks out to meet me, I'll be like, cool. Didn't believe you were real. Show me your non-belly button. But for me, it doesn't really make too much of a difference because I believe that there's truth in the story, regardless of whether or not it's historically accurate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think for me, the distinction that I'd like someone has said it, so it's not original for me. The true story and a truth story. What's a truth story? In some ways, if this is a newspaper-style account, it has very limited application.
Right.
If it's a truth story, it has almost infinite application because you actually are invited to draw more and more implications and applications and so in some ways, and there's different genres, which this group is certainly familiar with that. So not everything is one or the other, but this particular seems like that invites application in a whole bunch of context, more so than if it was just this happened on this date.
Right.
It's in Bible history.
Even when it gives dates, it's often to make it an epic story, not because it's actually giving a date that can be verified.
If he's 600 years old, or is he theologically something means something that this patriarch.
So let me give you another piece, Noah, that I would just say real quick is that there not being an actual physical Good Samaritan, doesn't change the truth of the Good Samaritan story. That was a parable. Jesus made up that story on the fly, talking to a bunch of people, and created this story. And so there being an actual person dying alongside the road as a fictitious character in a story by Jesus has not stopped us from naming every nonprofit the church creates some form of Good Samaritan thing, because there's truth in that story regardless of historical accuracy. Does that make sense? So like all of Jesus's parables are fiction, but we would talk very highly of those stories as though they are very significant truths, which I would agree. And so I think our problem isn't so much that these might be stories, it's that we were raised to think that they were historical truths, and now we might need to wrestle with them just being, not just, but being a story. And then it goes, well, then I don't even know what I believe anymore, which is understandable, but we don't question Jesus's parables. We don't say, oh, well, it's just a parable, so he didn't really mean anything by the Good Samaritan. Does that make sense? Did Michael?
Yeah. So if God is willing to reverse the creation narrative, then it shows that creation isn't something that God had to do. Creation is a pure act of grace or a gift.
It wasn't an effort.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking, that God in God's self doesn't need creation one way or the other.
Yeah.
Take
That's good, Michael. I don't have anything. Thank you for teaching today. I don't have anything to add to that. That is wonderful. So this is great. We've been talking a lot, but now we're running out of time. So I'm going to kind of do a blaze through real quick to kind of try and give us something to walk away with. One of the things I want to talk about is Malcolm when he was like 5. We went through this section and I helped him think about how he would exegete this passage as a child looking at this. And what I had him do was draw a picture of the story. And then I had him tell me what the picture was about. And to me, to this day, you know, Malcolm was really proud at 5. He was like, I taught my dad Torah, which he did. But what I thought was really profound is that when I read the story to Malcolm and he drew the picture, and the picture he drew was total Sunday school-esque. You know, it was the ark on the flood waters and animals sticking out of the ark. I was kind of disappointed because I wanted him to draw something more profound than that. But
Maybe more morbid with like dead bodies.
That's 5.
Yeah, but when I asked him I started asking him questions about the story, and I asked him what were the floodwaters for. His answer to me was to save Noah. And for me, that was really a profound moment to think about because I've often only thought about the floodwaters to destroy wickedness. And Malcolm's argument was that the floodwaters actually saved Noah. And again, I'm not asking you to agree or disagree with that, especially since Malcolm's sitting right here. But
yeah. We'll get you later, Malcolm.
But I think that that's one of the helpful ways for us to process. But so in the garden narrative, you have God creates the earth. He creates the garden. He has Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil in order to become more like God, and therefore going against God's command. Now we have people in the flood narrative where they are just could care less about what God has to say. At least this is the picture that's drawn for us in the text. And they are just doing their own thing, completely unaware, oblivious, or indifferent about God. In the next section, we have the Tower of Babel. And in the Tower of Babel, the people, now what is their motivation? They are actually going to build a tower to God. And so there's this interesting progression in the story, and I would even argue that in some ways we see, again, God behaving in some of the language of the Tower of Babel is creation narrative language, being fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and then God just finally dispersing the people throughout the earth. But the picture I see is that we have a consistent narrative that at the beginning of creation, man was wrestling what is their role when it comes to their relationship with God. In the garden, man's desire to skip the process of, I think in our mindset, maybe here would be skip the process of discipleship directly with God, as God walked in the garden with them, teaching them right and wrong, that they skip that process in order to become more like God. Remember we talked about last week, that's what the indication is in the text, that God threw them out of the garden because they become more like us, right? And now in this picture, we have the people are indifferent to God. In fact, Noah's only called righteous in his own generation, right? He's not called a righteous man. It says Noah who is righteous within his generation. Like compared to everyone else, Noah's righteous. And then in the next section, we have the people of God wanting to make a name for themselves. And so they decide to build this tower. And some people read this section, and I think to me it's a compelling story, is that they're actually storming the gates of heaven. Like that's what's going on with the Tower of Babel. That they are going up to heaven to take it by storm. The best part about that story then is the picture that God puts there, or the writer of Genesis says, and God went down to see what they were building, right? Like here they are, they're doing everything they can to build this tower to heaven, and God has to go down to see what it is. It's too far away. His vision is not good enough to see it from where he sits. He's going to have to go down and examine this puny little tower that the people were building. There's a lot in there to go on this stretch, but one of the things I also want to point out is that I'm trying to think. I'm trying to hurry through too much stuff. It might just be that I'd leave you a cliffhanger. You have to come back tomorrow night to Bible study. Sorry. One of the other arguments that's made about the Tower of Babel story, and this is really where I wanted to build to and close, and I'm going to jump a gap, and if you come tomorrow night, we'll fill in that gap. How's that sound? One of the other arguments is that man's technology, making bricks and mortar, eventually gets to the point where man begins to trust in his own technology and his own ability to create and build and make, that humankind begins to believe that they are better than God at creating than God was. That's some of the tradition that is around this picture. And I think for us, when I talk to people, religion is archaic. It's a way to, it's the opiate to the masses, whatever it might be, all this language of religion and faith being archaic. And I would argue that part of it is because we've begun to realize that we have so much intelligence, so much technology, so much giftedness in our creative processes that we have gotten to a place where we no longer have any dependency on God to invade our space. That we're able to solve all of our problems. I had a friend who was a pastor in Africa, and he came to the U.S. because he had been shot coming out of his church. And so someone brought him into the U.S., immigrated him into the U.S. to kind of rescue him from a very hostile setting. And we were talking, and he made the comment that they saw miracles happen all the time. I wasn't there, I can't validate these miracles. He was convinced of them. And I asked him why he thought miracles happen there all the time, but we don't see miracles here. And his answer was because you don't need them. He said, you don't need miracles. You have, if you're sick, you can call and schedule a doctor's appointment. If you're really sick, you can get in your car and go to the hospital. If something is wrong, you can lean on somebody close by. He said, whereas where he was from in Africa, that if your child became ill with a fever, it was too dangerous to move them over the terrain and into the great length of distances you would have to take them to get them medication. So you were dependent upon prayer. You were dependent upon God intervening. So I want to temper that quickly by saying I'm not saying that we should no longer see doctors or anything like that, nor was that what he was promoting. But there's something compelling about the idea that we have filled our lives with our own ability to create, our own ability to problem solve, our own ability to do all these things, that we've eliminated a lot of the necessity of God to intervene in our life, or for God to invade in our life. And I know that kind of feels like a jump from where we were in the Noah story, and like I said, hopefully tomorrow night we can kind of close that gap a little bit in Bible study. But I just want you to think about that. And again, can't impress upon you enough. I'm not asking you to become anti-technology and anti-medicine. That is not at all what I'm asking. What I am asking, though, however, is what are things in our life that we could simplify that might give our community more room to engage and care for us? Because, after all, according to Jesus, he is the person on the margins. That in some way, when we care for our neighbor, that is loving God, and that is God invading. And so I just want us to think about some of those things this week, because I don't know about you guys, but I spend a lot of time solving my own problems, right? But feeling like in life I'm treading water. And I wonder if I was willing to let other people engage, other people participate, let God invade in some way, if I would actually feel like I was moving instead of just treading water. So any thoughts or questions about that? Yes. Anyone wants to clarify? I realize since I jumped to a conclusion that wasn't built to, that it makes it complicated. Nothing. Okay. If you can stop the broadcast, and then we'll do